much for having me here and allowing our firm to share some of its experience in this particular area. Coming to Goa is always wonderful for everyone. We've had a wonderful time, and what's amazing is to see everybody from this industry together here, and the kind of dynamic interplay between people. So that's been wonderful.
That's wonderful. We are actually just checking the mic, just letting everybody know. Would you like to try the same on the podium?
Yeah.
The only thing is when you're on the podium, you're restricted.
Just the lights, we're not.
We have the light engineer there. What do you want the lights to go down? Better?
It's better.
Whatever you
do. No, I'm okay with this. I'm fine with this. Everyone can hear, right?
Yeah,
stand there.
You can keep the mic there itself. Yeah. In case if you need to feel to move around, you can just pick it up. It's going to be all right. So I think already ma'am is on the stage. Since she's already on the stage, let me at least tell you a few things about her. Radhika M is a partner with Shardul Amarchand Mangaldas and Company and is known for her brilliance in a wide range of topics under corporate law, including transactional, regulatory, and legal risk management advisory. The focus of her work over the years has been to structure transactions, provide strategy, documentation, and negotiation in respect to complex and sensitive transactions and/or situations across industry verticals, including real estate, infrastructure, insolvency, and bankruptcy. She was a part of the core committee established by the government of Maharashtra where she worked on legal issues relating to privatization. She is a director on the boards of many listed companies and is a member on the board of industry forums. She has been enlisted in Forbes India's Legal Power List 2020 as a top influential lawyer. She is a postgraduate from Cambridge University and Harvard University. And we are very delighted to have Madam with us. I believe now the stage is all yours and so is the audience.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here and enabling our firm to be able to share our experience in this area. We will be sharing a PPT presentation behind me, which will keep coming. But I'm not going to really take you through the presentation because I'm hoping to email it to you after our discussion is over. So that can be used by your teams within your companies to just have an overview. What I'd like to do today is to just share an overview of our experience in the area of ESGL, particularly in terms of governance. So as we know, ESG in terms of environment, social and governance standards is a very important aspect of business today. And this important aspect of business has come into being primarily because the various stakeholders, whether they were governments, social, regulators, then NGOs, as well as other stakeholders within the company, found it very important to be able to find a matrix which would kind of give an overview of the way the companies are running and the way the companies are affecting different aspects of their business. So the first one being environment, and I understand that there are speakers who are going to speak on environment and social, but I'll just touch upon it. With the advent and the detailed discussions around the globe with climate change, responsibility vis-a-vis the environment is a very fundamental aspect of ESG. And there are various methods in which each organization is essentially looked at in terms of its own contribution for reducing the carbon emissions. In terms of social, what is looked at is to see the organization spend time and effort to create a framework which encourages diversity within organizations, assist and help better quality of employment as well as for their labor force and the environment around it in terms of their own social endeavors by way of CSR and other activities. Now coming to governance. Until recently, reporting vis-a-vis governance was and has been primarily a more of an informative framework. So initially, amongst the first to be able to even set up framework within which these reportings will happen. So the Reserve Bank of India as well suggested that companies would make these reportings. But today, it is an actual legal requirement, and the top 1,000 companies on the stock exchange essentially required to give what is the business responsible sustainability reporting. Now let us understand what this reporting really comprises of and what governance means and what redefining governance means. So as we all know, because of the requirement of legal standards, all of the companies, whether they are private companies or public companies, are governed by essentially the regulatory framework, Companies Act being the primary one, and then depending on whether they are listed or not, the SEBI guidelines, the LODR, which becomes applicable. But as we know, governance is so much more than just compliance with law. Because what governance really looks to is the basis of decision making that essentially happens within the companies, as well as how the companies really record, express, and are accountable for their actions. So I'm going to divide my discussions into three parts. The first part being the legal framework. Now, the legal framework of any company comprises of course, the regulatory framework, which is the basis on which the company functions and revolves. It includes the licenses, the reporting, and the filings that the company has to do. Now, this is something which most companies are aware of, and this happens as a by way of a routine process. So, no one really thinks much about it. But what happens is, it is not only about the reporting, which is a check in the box, but the way in which it is done and whether the stakeholders who are actually implementing those reporting understand the seriousness of it. As we know, the reporting that happens requires the board to certify that the compliances in the company are being done properly and there are no exceptional reporting that happens. The key managerial personnel or the KMPs in the board of directors are today responsible at a much more severe manner than before. With the changes that came up with the latest amendments, the board of directors, including the independent directors, are much more responsible and held accountable for what happens in terms of governing. So one, of course, there has to be a certification in terms of compliance of law and the exception reportings that need to be justified as well as to be monitored. But more importantly, the policy framework in an organization requires companies to be able to ensure that those policies are actually implemented within the organization. And we come to some of the most important parts of governance, which are ethical policies. So there are different policies within the companies, which include, of course, policies relating to insider trading, policies relating to conflict management, policies relating to risk management services within the company, policies relating to anti-bribery and corruption, and of course the code of conduct within the corporations. These policies are not only required to be complied with and of course filings to be done, non-compliance of this or issues under this, including relating to POSH, has serious repercussions including imprisonment and fines. And that's why it is extremely important that these policies are understood. Regular trainings happen within organizations so that even the staff and the company personnel, employees understand the seriousness of it. So just to give you some of the examples, very often in terms of governance, the issues that come to law firm are by way of either notices received from regulators or sensitive issues that occur within a company on account of certain situations which have not been reported or handled in a manner which is within the legal framework. This includes issues relating to environment, this includes issues relating to ethical conduct, including issues relating to POSH. Typically what is understood is everybody understands the law. By and large, everybody knows what they're supposed to do. But the business itself is such a dynamic workplace that it is not always easy to be be able to implement it in both in form and spirit. And that is why today, whether it is the investors, the private equity players, the banking sector, all of them require to ensure that the follow-through or the framework is not only in terms of the legal framework that is available, but is actually implemented through the entire chain, whether it is the contractual chain of business or the vendor firms or the employees to ensure that it is actually being implemented. Some of the most important points that we have seen which form a very important part of investment decisions by private equity player are the standing in terms of the repute, goodwill, ethical issues, as well as the accountability of organizations. Because as we all know, the financial returns are something which is very easy to justify on the balance sheets of any companies. But it is the exceptional reporting, the issues that really sometimes form the greatest risk to investors that are coming in. And especially because investors are looking at two critical issues. One, of course, the financial returns that come to the company, thereby ensuring that their investment is secure. But also from a point of view of the risks which are associated of reputation as well as goodwill. So most of the companies that really go in for private equity as well as for listing, the issues that typically sometimes are bothersome and much more harder to handle are the sensitive issues. The sensitivity involves because this is a lot in respect to the intangibles. You know, in terms of financial reportings and others, there are various checks and balances by way of statutory as well as internal audit and other systems in place. However, in terms of intangible, it becomes harder because that requires an understanding and a very ethos, as the very ethos of the company. And that is why when you are looking at a conference right now, which is in terms of looking at the mutation, in terms of finding out new ways of doing the business so that one is adaptable to change, one of the most important aspects will be the agility of any business to respond to changes that happen. That agility can only come through, I'm now speaking in terms of the legal framework, if the existing framework enables that, which means the regulatory, the contractual, the policy framework and its implementation is already in place. It is reviewed periodically to ensure that the risks to the organizations in terms of both legal and regulatory are mapped and also reviewed on a regular basis. What is also important is to be able to look at smaller issues, because generally speaking the attention is always drawn to larger issues in terms of litigations and notices which are issued. But sometimes it is the smaller issues in terms of complaints which are filed internally within organizations, or not listening to people which are disgruntled or even bothered by certain issues. That is very important. The best example of that is the cases that come up in respect to either the code of conduct, under the whistleblower, or in respect to prevention of sexual harassment. These are issues which, typically speaking, at times tend to really be neglected, and thereby the reputational risk of an organization is severely hampered, as well as issues relating to ethics such as anti-bribery and corruption. Not always does the organization realize that there are laws in place today where the criminal liability is almost from 3 years to 7 years of imprisonment to all the KMPs which are responsible for certain decisions that are made and the implementation of those. So in terms of the legal framework, while governance seems like the most standard and the obvious aspect of business, implementation of it and the issues that come up with it are extremely sensitive. One of the important aspects of this is also to be able to understand that in the event of a risk, how does an organization respond? Which means, one, there has to be a mapping of risks that are there. The second, how is this risk mitigated? Certain risks, of course, can be eliminated if the necessary processes and checks and balances are in place. But for a lot of other risks are inevitable. So the impact of it needs to be just contained, because that is the best you can do. Which means that the regulatory understanding and the impact of it is important. The teams that are involved in terms of responding to such risks have to be trained and properly organized. The external counsels and the connect with respect to these have to be properly maintained. Because typically what we have seen is whenever there are issues where any kind of regulatory risks come up, and especially when you have other enforcement directorates, CBI, the other economic offences crimes are involved, those risks are so severe that everybody suddenly almost becomes numb. There's almost like a paralysis within the organization of not knowing what to do. And that's why these are issues that need to be sensitized or through to understand what are the kind of responses that are required to ring fence certain assets, to be able to ring fence certain functioning within the organization, to make available good counsel at the time when it's needed. Unfortunately, as we all know, these are laws where the flexibility or ability to be able to really get defenses is very, very weak. So, very, very difficult, rather not weak, but difficult. As a result of which, it takes days or even weeks before there is access to proper counsel and others, because investigative powers of these agencies are very strong. And as a result of which, they are so far-reaching that they can call people within the organizations, have them within custodies for a long periods of time, and then do the investigation. The idea here for me to have this discussion with you is not to, put fear or to be able to unnecessarily disturb you, but I just need to drive a point that governance is one of the very essential areas of not only value of organizations for what they stand for, but also being able to be vulnerable in so many different ways, because business practices require practical application. Now, while we need to be practical and need to ensure that it's time sensitive, it also requires a great restraint. And that restraint can only come if we are aware of the consequences of action. And so the internal understanding of the legal framework and the consequences, not only in terms of the key managerial person in the board which sits, but the people who are actually implementing businesses on the ground is extremely important. Most of the long drawn cases that we find across these areas of practice are cases where a lot of people did not heed to science or the framework of the law, and that was because they didn't think it was important enough, or they felt that it was just a way of doing business. But as we all know today, the legal framework is a lot more demanding today. It is rigorous, laws are being implemented as well as enforced in a very severe manner, and hence it requires an understanding which is much deeper. So if you ask me what is essentially corporate governance and reimagining it, one can look at it as responsible action. And responsible action is something which is a tone which the management, the promoters, the board needs to set forth, because the first and foremost wall of defense, in case of, if you've seen any war movies, it is normally the outer ring that gets affected first. But in case of corporate governance and legal issues, it's the first and foremost is the nerve center of the company, which is the board of directors. And thereby, and the KLPs, and thereby it becomes extremely important to be able to take care of this first. So, given this as a background, I think in terms of reimagining governance, the best practice but the practical implementation of those which really nurture legal framework, innovation, as well as application of legal principles on a regular basis is most important. So this is the overview of corporate governance. I'd just like to end this conversation by just two examples. The first example I'd like to give is a case of Island FS. Island FS, as we know, was a case where it was one of the most large infrastructure financing corporation, which was really run by a good board with systems in place, well audited and everything. However, unfortunately, when a situation arose whereby the questions were, it came to light in terms of the fraudulent transactions as well as dressing up of the books, the consequences of those were far-reaching. They were so far-reaching that it affected not just the company and the board of directors and the employees and the stakeholders, but also other businesses. The banks came by very strongly to be able to clamp up on the kind of funding it was giving to corporations which had standards which were anything other than perfect. So very often than not, in terms of one's own financing, what we will find is whether it's private equity or whether it's debt financing, the issues really that come up are not really when everything is going right, but it is when it is the most difficult. So when there are market changes, when there are economic downturn, that is when all of these issues and the perception in respect to the company and its goodwill matters. So I'm so happy that in this conference, companies are looking inward and finding new ways to innovate, to be able to see how one can redefine themselves. I think corporate governance and looking at how its implementation within the organization would be a wonderful way to be able to implement all that you plan for. So with that, I wish you the very best and look forward to more interactions in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I request you to please be on the stage. And can I request our IPA president and the conveners to please join us on the stage to present a small token of appreciation and memento. We have Justin, Riya ma'am, and of course Gupta sir for. Yes, we're going to have the lights on. Can we have the lights on? Thank you so much. As you can see, we are back on time. Thank you, ma'am, for that as well. I would like to move to the next. We've got reimagining sustainability, and we've got our speaker, Dr. Radhika M from United Phosphorus. Can I request Dr. Radhika M sir to please join us? And as he makes his way onto the stage, let me tell you something about him. Dr. Radhika M is sustainability, environmental, and water waste management treatment expert of international repute. He has done PhD in environmental engineering from Indian Institute of Technology, Delhi, bringing him with nearly 25 years of experience. Dr. Chaubey has helped large corporates such as Pentair, Shell, Unilever, and UPL significantly reduce the carbon footprint. Dr. Chaubey is on the editorial board member of renowned international journal, Research Journal of Chemistry and Environment, as well as Arab Water Board. He is also a member of the Bureau of Indian Standards for making BIS standards for water and wastewater treatment and environmental protection. Dr. Chaubey is the author of renowned book, Wastewater Treatment Technologies Design Consideration, and has numerous other publications in reputed journals as well. Dr. Chaubey is currently working as Global Vice President, Environment, Sustainability and Green Cell with UPL. He is also Chairman of the Indian Chemical Council Carbon Neutrality Committee. Recently, Dr. Chaubey is awarded the Most Influential Sustainability Leader Award, Chief Sustainability Officer of the Year Award, and Asian Sustainable Leadership Award as well. Thank you so much for joining in, sir. The stage and the audience is all yours.
chat. Even first time I came in Indian Paint Association and this paint industry conference. So I happens to go in several conferences, several associations, and even in Indian Chemical Council every year I happens to be from the organizer side. But one thing I can see when I see the participation. Yesterday I was discussing and somebody told me that nearly 700 participants are here in this conference.